Welcome, everyone. We are excited about today's webinar, and we'll be getting started at the top of the hour. As we wait, we encourage you to start the conversation on Facebook and on Twitter. You see our handles there and the hashtags that we use. So that's hashtag GL Reading and then a hashtag Learning Tuesdays.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's GLR Learning Tuesdays webinar. My name is Dorian, and I'm a consultant with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, and will be hosting and moderating today's conversation. Before we get started, though, I'd like to go over just a couple of quick housekeeping details. First, I encourage you all to use the chat box function to share your name, organization, and the GLR coalition that you are part of, if you're part of the GLR coalition. Also, just wanted to share that we will be recording this webinar, and we'll be sharing a link to the recording along with the slides in this week's GLR Learning Tuesdays electronic newsletter, which should be coming out on Friday afternoon. And then finally, I just wanted to give you a heads up that we will be posting a very short survey poll after the presentations in today's webinar during the Q&A portion of the conversation. And would really encourage you to just take a couple of moments to share your thoughts and feedback. This is really valuable information, helps us continue to improve these online learning opportunities and make sure that they are truly meeting your needs. Now, I'd just like to share a little bit of background about GLR Learning Tuesdays. If we could actually go back to the previous screen, I'm sorry. If you, as you can see on the previous screen, there you go, we have a number of great sessions planned for the coming weeks, always on Tuesday, always at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And we're really hoping that this predictable and reliable schedule will make it easier for you and others to make plans to join in for these, the robust series of learning conversations that we have scheduled moving forward. We've already hosted 7 webinars since the launch of GLR Learning Tuesdays in September, and I encourage you to visit CLIP, where you can find a growing archive of recordings and slide decks and other resources from these conversations, exploring the science, emerging models, and the work of leaders and partners in the field. And I also hope you'll continue to save the date, Tuesdays at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, to join in for more of these great conversations. Now to the next slide, if we could. For today's webinar, we're going to be kicking off a 2-part conversation exploring the promise of virtual home visiting and scaling up the proven practice of home visiting to reach even more families in ways that are more convenient and more cost-effective. And to kick off that conversation, I'd like to introduce Carly Roberts. Carly leads the Early Impact portfolio at the Overdeck Family Foundation. If we could go to the next slide, I'm sorry. And Overdeck is working to support strong foundations for early learning through investments focused on families with young children. Carly brings a deep experience to this conversation, having worked in education and early learning throughout her career, including consulting for school districts, the Robin Hood Foundation, and the Newark Trust for Education, and also coaching for Head Start teachers. So welcome, Carly.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you. So Carly, I was wondering if you could start off the conversation by telling us a little bit about the Overdeck Foundation's work in education and why you chose to provide some of the seed funding for this innovative virtual model of home visiting.
Yes, my pleasure. So our work at Overdeck Family Foundation is really all about providing all children the opportunity to unlock their potential. And that's why we focus on education, both inside and outside the classroom, where we know learning happens all around children, and why our investments in early childhood education are really centered around supporting the families of young children, who we know our parents are their children's first teacher. We take a two-pronged approach to funding that we think drives toward greater impact. First, we scale evidence-based interventions to reach more people. And second, we support early stage innovations that have high potential for impact and scale. We think it's incredibly important to support organizations in both of these stages for a healthy ecosystem of supports and interventions. And to us, investing in this really innovative way to deliver an evidence-based intervention was a great fit for our grant making. We really recognize the power of home visiting, and particularly the importance of that human connection between the parent educators and the families. And we also recognize that today's technology enables that connection without actually physically being together. So we were excited to work with parents as teachers and, of course, the USC telehealth team to really test the hypothesis that it's both possible and acceptable to families to deliver these services virtually, and to understand whether it could be actually as effective as in-person delivery. We really hope that this could lead to greater efficiency, as well as increasing access for underserved or hard to reach populations based on geography or scheduling or cultural barriers.
Thanks. And so now that we've seen some of the results from those early investments that Overdeck made, what role do you think that other either local or regional foundations and funders could play in implementing or promoting this model in their communities?
Yeah, so as a national funder, we were really thrilled to be able to invest in the early stages of this work and support that piloting phase. We see our role as national players to be able to cover some of the risk of new things and try out innovations before they're fully proven. And we do that so that local and regional funders can more easily embed this work into their local context. The great thing about Parents as Teachers is that there are affiliates in all 50 states, and so we see place-based funders having the opportunity to find local affiliates and help them either get ready to deliver virtual services or making the move toward actually starting to deliver. And we really see this as helping dollars go further and support more families and children. We're excited to see this spread far and wide in more regional and local contexts.
Thanks so much for that, Carly. So now I'd like to introduce our next two co-presenters who will share what virtual home visiting actually entails, what it looks like, and what we're beginning to learn about its impact. And for that, I'd like to welcome Amanda Taylor and Dorian Traube to the conversation. Dorian is the Executive Vice Dean and an Associate Professor in the Suzanne Dvorak Peck School of Social Work at the University of Southern California. She's also the Director of Parents as Teachers at USC Telehealth, which is the first partnership of its kind between a national home visitation model and a university-based telehealth clinic. Her research focuses on the utilization of technological solutions like virtual home visiting in providing early childhood health, education, and parent support services. Amanda Taylor is the project assistant for Parents as Teachers at USC Telehealth, and she's served as the parent educator for the program, utilizing this technology to engage with and support families. So welcome, Dorian and Amanda, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
So Dorian, I'd like to start with you first. Could you just share a little bit about how you and your team came to develop this virtual approach?
Sure. So we entered into a conversation around home visitation, really looking for a way to move the needle on early childhood education, parent support, parent coaching. The general feeling nationwide is that home visitation plays a very important role in the landscape of early childhood. because there are demonstrable outcomes for many models that show that home visitation, where a trained professional enters somebody's home and works with a family, can support things like breastfeeding, child well visits with a pediatrician, developmental gains, and the detection of potential developmental delays or developmental issues, in addition to longer-term outcomes like school readiness and the prevention of child maltreatment. So those are really important things that we have to invest in during early childhood. And so home visitation has the potential to really move the needle on that. Where we came into the picture is that we were really interested in the way that technology could be utilized to support families. The challenges that home visitation face nationwide are issues of access, scalability, reaching families, having enough slots for families. And so that was where the idea of Parents as Teachers at USC Telehealth emerged. USC was operating a full mental health clinic where we were delivering mental health services with trained providers using live video conferencing technology that had a lot of the safeguards built in that families and individuals can worry about when receiving care digitally. So is it HIPAA compliant? Is my information protected? Is my provider trained? And so we thought, well, what would happen if we thought about how to deliver a home visitation model using that same technology? So we reached out to parents as teachers, and they were really primed to engage with us in this project. So today, what we're going to talk about is a little bit about what is Parents as Teachers at USC Telehealth. How have these virtual home visitation outcomes developed, and what do they look like? And what transferability and replication would look like for other communities? And are there options for communities to do portions of what we do or combine it with other models that they're using to be more salient to their communities? So I'm going to start by talking about what this endeavor was related to Parents as Teachers at USC Telehealth. Basically, we wanted to demonstrate that we could, with fidelity, deliver an entire home visitation model. And so we combined with the Parents as Teachers National Center to form a partnership between an academic entity and a national nonprofit to decide if this was a scalable solution for home visitation. And in addition to trying to address those questions around scalability and cost, we also were thinking about what do current parents want when they're looking for solutions for their families. And what has become very clear to us over the period of time that we've done this program is the vast majority of current parents are also digital natives. So their entire life, they have been heavily connected to internet-based resources, and that is the first place that they go when they're looking for support. So having the option and the opportunity to engage a high-tech, high-touch approach in supporting their parenting and supporting their child development is very important. Our entire intervention is based on the Parents as Teachers model. I'm sorry, could you go back one slide for just a moment? It's based on the Parents as Teachers model. So if anybody has a Parents as Teachers affiliate in your community, you may be familiar with this program. Parents as Teachers has been operating for over 30 years. As Carly mentioned, they're in all 50 states. There are also some international sites as well, and it is considered an evidence-based model for home visitation. Now we can go to the next slide. When we started this a little over 3 years ago, we did a basic pilot where we really focused on what's the infrastructure that's needed and the training that's needed both for providers and families to understand how to use video conferencing to connect with one another and move through the Parents as Teachers curriculum. The Parents as Teachers curriculum is highly digitized in and of itself, and so that was a great starting point for us to be working with a national model that was already ahead of the curve in terms of their technology. And then we moved into our phase 2 feasibility study, and that was really where Overdeck was so influential to the development of this program. They helped us recruit even more families and really study both the fidelity of the intervention when we deliver it online, what retention looks like for families who are receiving an online program, and how recruitment and enrollment would differ between on-ground programs, those programs where the home visitor is knocking on the person's front door and physically entering their home, versus a virtual program like we deliver. And now we're moving into this phase 3 where we're really interested in the model dissemination and some comparative outcomes for communities. So to give you a basic idea of what our infrastructure looked like and how these two entities came together, from parents as teachers, what they provided us was the service components of their model and their curriculum, and a beautiful suite of fidelity checks. And so that was amazing because it was very easy for us to determine whether or not we were meeting the same benchmarks as any other program affiliate of parents as teachers. They also offered and continue to offer us full technical assistance, and they have their own electronic medical records system called Penelope, which allows us an easy way for gathering our data, but also makes it feasible for the Parents as Teachers National Center to compare what we're doing to their other programs. From USD Telehealth, we received a clinic structure. So just like any other clinic, there's a phone number you can call, a live person you can speak to both schedule appointments, change appointments, and get technical support if a family is having difficulty accessing the video conferencing platform. So there's that client interface, and there's also, this is how we do all of our supervision of our parent educators, which is the term that Parents as Teachers uses for their home visitors. And so that morphed into Parents as Teachers at USC Telehealth. And within that affiliate program, what we do is offer all training to our providers, recruitment for our families. We offer the technological navigation and technical assistance. We do all of our own documentation and evaluation. And together, both organizations do collaborative fund development, and we collaborate to disseminate any of our findings. So the way that our affiliate works, and this is a function of Parents as Teachers, and I saw that there are some folks on the webinar from other national home visitation models, and I believe this structure that Parents as Teachers has is very similar to other national models. That the National Center had to approve us as an affiliate. So our structure is the exact same for our organization, Parents as Teachers at USC Telehealth, as it would be for any on-ground entity, any child guidance program, any school district that could be delivering Parents as Teachers. So that means that we have to follow all of the National Center's essential quality assurance guidelines. Those are those fidelity measures that I mentioned. We have an advisory board, and we are so lucky to have this great advisory board. And I think because so much of what we do is virtual, we've been able to recruit a stellar advisory board. We have a neonatologist, a lactation consultant, and postpartum doula. We have folks who specialize in telehealth. We have folks who specialize in Parents as Teachers, and they're all over the United States. But because we meet virtually, they're able to really come and continue to support us. And we have the full policies and procedures that any affiliate would have. In terms of workforce development, we are kind of dually training a workforce to be both skilled in home visitation and telehealth service delivery. And that's really important to us because it allows us to ensure that there's a skill transfer. All of our providers receive reflective supervision in the same way that any other parent educator would. And we are also considered a teaching institute within the University of Southern California, which is very exciting for us. It gives us some extra educational support for both our providers and for the dissemination of what we do.
Thanks for that, Dorian, that overview of kind of the structure of this work at USC Telehealth. Now I thought we could turn to Amanda. Amanda, now that we have a little bit of that background, can you shed some light on how that standard model or how the on-the-ground model compares to this new virtual approach, and kind of what does virtual home visiting look like, and what do you do in the video conferencing with families? And for those of you on the webinar, I just wanted to share a little technical note here. Amanda will be sharing a video in just a moment, and we found that there's a slight sound delay when you are listening via phone audio rather than computer audio, but it plays nicely when you watch the recording afterwards. So Amanda, can you kind of walk us through and share what this looks like on the ground?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking that. Since we are using the evidence-based model, what I think is great is that our visits are the exact same visit that would be happening on ground. So since we are using technology, we do have to coach families on how to use that technology so that we can still see the entire parent interaction with their child and can see the environment, and we want to see both the parent and the child at the same time. But I think through doing that and coaching the parent, we're facilitating that partnership to where the parent is actually engaging with their child even more than maybe if we were in the home, because I've heard from some on-ground parent educators that sometimes when they enter homes, parents expect them to do the activities with the children themselves. But here we're coaching the parents and guiding them on how to interact with their child, and we're there for support. So I really think we're able to effectively facilitate that partnership. And let's take a look at what a virtual visit looks like.
Being a parent is amazing and challenging all at the same time. Parents know their child better than anyone, but every parent can use support and guidance from a trusted person. Someone who is trained and has knowledge to provide both concrete parenting skills and needed emotional support. In their first few years, children will learn more and at a faster pace than at any other time in their life. 80% or more of a child's brain will develop during that window of prenatal to 3 years old. As their child's first and most influential teacher, parents provide the interactions and experiences that help their children learn and grow to become the best that they can be. Research has shown that family support and parent education programs are the best way to ensure a family is developing as a strong and healthy unit. For over 30 years, Parents as Teachers, one of the largest parent education programs in the United States, has been improving the know-how and confidence of parents and the health and development of their young children. Within visits and groups, parents receive research-based information and have opportunities to apply this knowledge and build their parenting skills. USC Telehealth is the leading provider of high-tech house calls, having served over 2,000 individuals seeking to gain new life skills provided through state-of-the-art video conferencing technology. Now, Parents as Teachers has partnered with USC Telehealth and the USC Suzanne Dvorak Peck School of Social Work to make home visiting parent education available through the internet. Parents as Teachers at USC Telehealth will match families with a trained and certified parent educator who will personalize information and activities to reduce parenting stress, increase children's school readiness, and identify and address health issues or developmental delays. Parents will meet with a parent educator in the comfort of their own home using secure video conferencing technology so that they can see their parent educator and interact with them in real time. This is a great option for families who have complex schedules and need flexibility in scheduling, for families who cannot access services for their children in their communities, or would simply feel more comfortable using their computer to talk to a trained and trusted person. Take a moment and see exactly what to expect from Parents as Teachers at USC Telehealth. Brandy, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Great, thank you. How's Nola been since we last talked?
She's been really good. She's developing a lot and seeing lots of changes in her, and yeah, she's doing really good. She's very busy.
She is coming up on a new month, right?
Yeah, she's going to be 15 months next week.
Okay, so that's a big one. And have you noticed any kind of developmental leaps for her? Is she talking, jabbering more?
Talking a little bit more. She's been saying some words, lately, like she's been saying the dog's name, which is Sydney. She can't say brother's name yet, but she can say the dog's name. She's already been saying mama and papa, so we're seeing more language. I feel like she's asking for what she wants a little bit more, or it's a bit more clear when she has needs that she wants met. And developmentally, her walking is really improved.
So if you pull out your parent, your activity kit that we sent you, you should have some materials in there. So do you have the 2 water bottles?
Oh, I do. Let me pull them out. So we have our water bottles.
And do you have any the puff balls that are in there?
So we have puff balls here.
Great. And what you can do is you can hand those to her and just see from her imaginative play what she does with those puff balls and the water bottle.
No, I'm always going to put this inside the water bottle. Can you see that? Oh, yeah, so she's grabbed it and put it in.
Okay,
Yeah.
see?
And I'm going to pick the other one up and put it next to her and see if she tries to, but she seems to be pretty intently putting it in the first one that I put it in.
Right. So she's copying you, which is a great way to teach your kids skills.
Now she's trying the other water bottle and seeing if she can get it in. But I think she wasn't able to. She went back to her other one. So she's trying it again, the smaller one. There you go. She got it in. She kind of looked at it a little bit and maybe did some problem solving to see if she could get it in. And she was able to.
Absolutely. So some real trial and error there to see what would work. And I like that she went back to that first bottle that she knew she'd been successful with, because what that showed is she's trying to figure out why it worked in one and not the other.
Thank you so much for watching that. So that was just a little snippet of what a personal visit would look like virtually. And so a personal visit is one of the 4 components of the Parents as Teachers model. So families are doing personal visits with us. We are also hosting group connections, which gives them an opportunity to learn about a parenting topic and meet with other families who are enrolled in our program. They have a resource network, so we're providing families with resource connections. And then we also facilitate child screenings, which is the last piece of the Parents as Teachers model.
Thanks for that, Amanda. So as a parent educator, what has been your experience in actually using this virtual approach in engaging and supporting families? What do you see as some of its benefits and any drawbacks in comparison to the on-the-ground model? And one question we've had from one of the participants, kind of a technical question, is what type of technology are the families using, or what devices, I guess? Are they using phones, iPads, laptops? How are you making this connection?
Sure, so I'll answer that question first. So we are using the video conferencing technology that we use is a HIPAA compliant version of Zoom, and families can access that through their computer. Some have used phones as long as we're still able to see them and their child and they can see us. And we also provided tablets for families previously, and we do offer them free stands that will fit like a tablet or a phone so that they can position their device so that we can see everything. We had offered them iPads. I saw that there's a question for what kind of tablet. So let me talk a little bit about the benefits. I really love this work. I was so happy that I had the opportunity to come back because I was a parent educator when I was completing my MSW at USC, and then I got invited back to be a supervisor and still be a parent educator with the program. One of the benefits I see is through our recruitment style. So basically anyone who has access to internet and a technology and can have these visits. So we were able to recruit families through social media, our website, and through their own communities that they were in. We did some hospital referrals as well. But what was really cool about that is my caseload was very diverse. And so I served a variety of different cultures. Another benefit to this style of recruitment is that our visits, we can serve many populations that may not have on-ground services available. Or we've had some families who have been medically fragile to where we've been the only provider that their child can see because they can't leave the house due to germs or illness. Or this is also a great visit option for military families or families who are moving frequently, because they can keep their same parent educator throughout the entire process. I also think about, since I'm located in Michigan, I was seeing families across the United States. So that was another really cool experience. If you could go to the next slide, please. And I know Dorian talked a little bit on fidelity before, but since we're using the parents as teachers model, that is a huge benefit to our visits, because we can make sure that our families are receiving the same type of visit virtually that they would be receiving in their home. All right, I'm ready for our next slide. Another amazing piece was the assessments and screenings that we did with our families. So we had screenings for their children, also for the parents, and for the family as a whole. So we care, when we talk about family well-being, we're talking about mom, dad, the children. So we screened all of them. What I really thought was awesome is that since we were out of the USC telehealth clinic, if we had any mental health or depression come up on our PHQ-9 screening, which is the Patient Health Questionnaire 9, we were able to directly refer them for mental health services that were also free and virtual. So we were able to do that continuation of care and make sure that they were connected to a mental health resource. We also are able, what I have our parent educators do, and what I did as a parent educator, is you get familiar with the family's area because you may not necessarily live in their community. So it's important before you even see the family day one that you're making sure you're familiar with all the resources that are available so that you can provide them with those, especially after a screening. And as far as any drawbacks, sometimes technology can fail. So you do have to think about if there's bad weather on your end or the client's end that may affect your technology. The way that we've been able to troubleshoot that is we had a person we could call at the telehealth clinic that could walk families through their technology and help them troubleshoot any errors that might be occurring with the Zoom technology. But sometimes bad weather does happen and you may have to reschedule a visit. The other, I guess, challenge would be, like I was saying, you need to make sure you're familiar with an individual's area if you do not live in their community so that you can connect them with the proper resources. When I was a parent educator, I did have to make a mandated report for a family while I was living in Michigan and the family was in California. And so it was good that I was familiar with their community beforehand and I had the proper phone numbers to call, and I was able to make that report and help that family and continue our services.
Thanks for that, Amanda. I have one quick question before we go back to Dorian. Just a quick follow-up. Somebody was asking what PICCOLO, P-I-C-C-O-L-O, stands for in one of the previous screens.
So the PICCOLO stands for Parenting Interactions with Children, and then it also has a subtitle, Checklist of Observations Linked to Outcomes. So it's basically a checklist that assesses developmentally supportive parenting.
Okay, great. Thank you for that explanation. So Dorian, staying with you, now that we kind of know more about this virtual approach, can you share some of what your research and evaluation is telling us about its potential for really scaling up this evidence-based home visiting model?
Sure. If we could go to the next slide, we have a nice infographic. Again, this is one of the beauties of working with an organization that has its own data management system, is that part of that means that it generates these beautiful infographics, which have been exceptionally helpful in conveying our message. We really think hard about the basic premise of how many families are we serving, how many groups are we serving, and then we have some sub areas that we look into. But to give a larger view, To date, in the last 3 years, we have served 371 individuals, and we have completed over 1,700 personal visits. So those are visits where we are one-on-one with a family. So there may be multiple people at the family present, but the provider's only working with one family, covering the 4 model components of parents as teachers. So that would be working on parent-child interaction, developmental-centered parenting, focusing on family well-being, and making resource connections or connecting them to services to support their family. We've done 47 group visits, and those are where we have multiple families entering into our video conference platform, much like we are right here today, although we would all be looking at one another. And so we've offered 47 of those over the last 3 years, and they generally center around a specific topic for families. So that could be something like dental care for your child. The one example that I love to offer is one that we did around nutrition for families, and it was our very first group connection, and that points to the duration of our visits that I want to highlight. Generally speaking, when you're meeting with somebody by video conference or through a telehealth platform, the duration of the interaction is shorter. It's just kind of the nature of people's attention spans when you're doing something by video. We were very surprised to find that families were consistently hanging out with us for at least 90 minutes. And in that very first one that we did, where we really talked about families' nutrition and families' needs, it was butting up against dinner time. And all of a sudden we had babies crying in the background, and I had a parent set up her tablet right next to the stove and start making dinner for everyone, which was remarkable that families could still continue to engage with us. Our personal visits run 60 minutes, which is the exact same duration as those that are on ground. And then our immunization rate right now is about 100% for 19 to 25-month-olds. I want to point out that that is a little bit, that needs to be interpreted carefully. Most of our families at this point have come from the Los Angeles area, and there are very, very strict policies and guidelines now, both in the state of California and in the county of Los Angeles related to vaccinations. So there have been a lot of forces around moving the dial on childhood vaccination rates in this area. We could go to the next slide. I'd also like to talk some about program outcomes that we have seen when we're thinking about what's different between our on-ground service delivery and virtual service delivery. One of the things that we have found is that our visits need to be more frequent. So in an on-ground affiliate, it's not unusual, especially if the family is not exceptionally high risk, to see them twice a month or once a month. What we have found is that when we're doing a virtual version, families will forget to turn on their computers, even if they have had a reminder from their provider. And so families do wind up needing their visits to be more frequent. So we see families for about the same duration as on ground. Our average is 12 to 16 personal visits in a year. I'm sorry, 12 to 16 personal visits. On ground, those might be spread over a year. And when we do it virtually, we really need to pack those into 3 to 4 months to be able to retain our families. Our families tend to skew a little younger too. So we tend to receive families with much younger infants and young toddlers. And that might be related to who's seeking a technological solution, but it may also be a halo effect of how we've recruited our families. A big portion of our recruitment happens through a partner organization called the LA Best Babies Network. They are the referral hub for all home visitation in Los Angeles County. And the bulk of their recruitment is done in hospitals postpartum. So that might also be why a lot of our families skewed younger. It was exciting to us to find out that most families already have the technology needed for virtual services. We live in a highly connected world. And so the vast majority of our families had internet or data plans on their phones or tablets that would allow them to come and meet with us. So initially, one of the things we worked closely with Overdeck on was offering the technology to families. But it turned out that most already had it. We also have found that very specific training is required for providers. So it's not a one-to-one shift that if you know how to deliver parents as teachers on ground, you can easily sit down in front of a computer and do it. There is a small skill shift there, so we do need specific training for providers to deliver these services virtually. The next slide, I'd like to feature some of our results from our parent satisfaction survey. We survey our families multiple times a year to find out how they're feeling about our program. That is part of a Parents and Teachers Fidelity Measure. And so the first slide, 89% of our participants felt USC telehealth was better or the same as an in-person visit. In the next slide, 90% of our participants strongly agreed that they felt that they're comfortable talking with their parent educator. And 100% agreed that they had comfort. 100% of our participants felt that their parent educator identified their family's strengths. And here are some quotes from our families about what they really felt was helpful in this program. Things like new ways of parenting. They loved that they could do it from home and they don't have to go anywhere. And of course, that's a beautiful feature of all home visitation. That there were resources, that they had a great relationship with their parent educator, that they could review their developmental concerns, how to use different tools with their kids, and to receive feedback. So, you know, they were highly satisfied with the curriculum that they did receive. Next, I'm going to hand it over to Amanda, who's going to talk about the results of a social media recruitment campaign that we did via Facebook. One of the things that we realized in this comparison between on-ground and online is that often when we were recruiting families directly from the hospitals, we would get referrals for them and then we would call to schedule them, and they had no memory in that postpartum haze of ever signing up for a virtual home visitation program, and who can blame them? And so what we did was we thought, if our families are really interested in a digital solution for parenting support, maybe the best way to reach out to them is through other high-tech methods as well. So we did a social media recruitment campaign through Facebook to see how that impacted the way that we recruited our families. And Amanda led that campaign and is going to cover some of the outcomes from that.
Yeah, so on the next slide is just an image of the actual post that I boosted. So we do have a Facebook page that is connected to our website. And so a lot of families nowadays are on either Facebook or Instagram, and they use it to connect with others. So we linked our Facebook to our website, and we're trying to see if, you know, just boosting this post and linking it to our website would get us any families into our program. So it was a successful campaign. If you want to go to the next slide. So this, I'll just break it down. It's our website analytics. So it shows who came to our website just from this Facebook post. So we ran this March 11th. So you can see that the daily average hits dramatically increased. So we got over double the number of hits to our website. So that's what this image is showing. And then the next image. So this just shows visitors to our website before, during, and after this campaign. So in February, you can see that we hardly had any. The beginning of March, hardly had any. And then all of a sudden, there was this huge jump when we did that Facebook post. And it will show you the daily visitors, weekly and monthly. So it really drew a lot of traffic to our website, and we were able to sign up some families from that. So that was good. And then our next slide. So this just talks about the different ways that we've shared our work. So we've shared through literature, reports, conferences, and you can find a lot of this on our website. So we'll give you our website link and our Facebook link at the end.
Thank you, Amanda. Wondering if we could shift back now to Dorian, because Dorian, I've been seeing tons and tons of questions coming in the chat box that we'll follow up with in just a minute, but it seems like there is a lot of interest from folks who might be thinking about implementing this approach in their communities. So can you share with them maybe what are some of the next steps they should be thinking about? What are the tech requirements that they would need? And how can they know if they're ready to integrate virtual home visiting either into an on-the-ground program or start virtual home visiting on its own?
Absolutely. So one thing I want to point out is what is happening in both the field of home visitation and in allied fields. So in the field of home visitation, we see many models that are developing high-tech components, either apps to support their home visitors, apps to support their families. So it's very clear that the field of home visitation is aware and wants to embrace technological solutions for families. In allied fields, the use of telehealth is proliferating in pediatrics because it just means that we're able to keep children healthier, and that's everybody's goal. And so there are some fantastic models out there in the field of autism research, in the field of speech language pathology, where they use the same modality to be able to reach families in their home and check in on families and guide families and partner with families. And so I think when communities and organizations are toying with the idea of jumping into utilizing technology for home visitation, they need to ask themselves, what are the options currently in your community? And within that, what is the quality of the home visitation programs that are offered? What does your workforce look like? And what are the accountability structures within your region around home visitation? One of the things that made it feasible for us to be serving Los Angeles in the way that we have is that there was a robust infrastructure for home visitation, which made things like the resource connections and referring families much easier for us to do from a distance. We also have to ask, what are the barriers and costs of this technological adaptation? Because there can be barriers for organizations that may not have adequate privacy for their providers to meet. They're not unwilling to let providers work from home, whether or not they can support the technology that's needed. Somebody I saw earlier asked what video conferencing platform we use. We use Zoom. We want to make sure that everything we do is HIPAA compliant. So often we're asked, like, could we just be using FaceTime to do this? Skype, those are not highly protected programs. So I'm sorry, platforms. So we really want to avoid using those. And what are the costs going to be like? Because just like you need to have a physical infrastructure when you're an organization, you also have to have virtual infrastructure. So we, like I said, we get our electronic medical record system from parents as teachers as part of our relationship, but we do cover costs related to our Zoom licenses. We also use an electronic signing program called DocuSign to sign consent forms with our families because we are working with them 100% virtually. We have developed a readiness checklist for communities or organizations to go through And it is exceptionally comprehensive. It covers everything from what are the needs of your community down to what are the resources within your organization. And so we would be glad to share that with any organization or community that would be interested in exploring that checklist. And the other thing to think about is how we can move towards something called precision home visiting. Precision home visiting really focuses on those key ingredients that are needed in home visitation to be effective. Kind of like it's hard to make bread without yeast. So what is the yeast in home visitation, and how can we use virtual home visitation to support that? And so we have done some extensive work around screening using virtual platforms. The other idea that we are very invested in is progressive universalism. We believe every family in the world could benefit from home visitation models that are culturally sensitive and evidence-based, and that it is exceptionally difficult to scale those, and that using video conferencing technology and other digital solutions can move that needle. So if we could go to the next slide, I want to draw your attention to some resources that we have available. If you're thinking about this, I encourage you to visit our Parents as Teachers at USC Telehealth website. There you will see a longer version of the demonstration video that we featured today, briefs about what we have done, media coverage, and research findings. Another thing I'd like to highlight is that there's an additional webinar next week that Parents as Teachers National Center will be hosting with the campaign for grade level reading. And that one will focus in on what I was just talking to you about around precision home visiting. That one will specifically highlight a lot of work that we've done around virtual screening and talk about what can be done with communities to take a more modularized approach if they're not interested in delivering a whole model using video conference, using a telehealth platform. Are there portions that they might want to use, like group connections or screening? I also included our contact information. If anybody would like to reach out to either me or Amanda, we'd be glad to field any questions in addition to the questions that emerged today in the webinar.
Thank you so much for that, Dorian, and thank you, Amanda, for your presentation as well. We have been getting flooded with lots and lots of questions, so people are really interested in what you're sharing and what you're learning through this approach. So thank you so much for taking the time to participate in today's webinar. One quick follow-up question that we just received for you, Dorian, is if you can explain what the screening is that you're looking at in regards to precision home visiting. Is it a developmental screening, or is it something else that you were just referencing?
Oh, well, so precision home visiting, I apologize, I just got a bunch of feedback. Precision home visiting specifically focuses in on elements of home visitation that cut across all models, that are not specific to a particular type of model, that are necessary to ensure that families are receiving adequate support and moving the needle on child development. And one of those elements is screening. And that's developmental screening, that's also family functioning screening. So Amanda had covered that a little bit earlier. We base most of the assessments that we collect in our assessment and screening both on what is required by the Parents as Teachers model and also what is required by HRSA's MCV, or Maternal and Early Infant and Early Childhood Home Visitation Program. They're the largest vendor of home visitation in the country, and they have specific requirements around funding. We don't use their funding, but we just wanted to make sure we could align with them. And so within that, we collect a family assessment on each family, a caregiver assessment around caregiver mental health, and then those child and health screenings, specifically the ages and stages social emotional questionnaires.
Great, thank you for that. So we've had some questions that are kind of digging into the difference and the comparison between the on-the-ground version of home visiting and virtual. home visiting, and one has to do with the caseload. How many families does a teacher or a parent educator or provider have in their caseload, and is there a difference between caseloads of in-home or on-the-ground parent educators versus virtual parent educators?
Do you want me to take that one, Dorian? Okay.
Sure.
So really, that's something that's not going to be a difference between on-ground and virtual. That's going to be a difference between the different parents as teachers affiliates. So since right now we're using MSW students and we have them 20 hours a week, I cap their caseloads at 12 families. So they each see 12 families each would be their max, just because of the 20 hours. But a positive to doing the virtual is that my parent educators don't have travel time to get to their families. So they are truly working that 20 hours either with their families or in their case management software.
Great. So I think one of you, I can't remember which, mentioned that there's a different kind of enhanced training program to prepare parent educators to be virtual parent educators in addition to the on-the-ground model. Somebody's asked if there is kind of a training program that you have developed to prepare parent educators to implement the virtual approach, and if that's something that is ready to share or available to others thinking about this model. And that's a question.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, sure. Thanks, Sarah. Absolutely. So that was one of the key things that we focused on way back, which only 3.5 years ago, but it feels like 100 years ago when we started this project. That was one of the first things we focused on, was how do we train our folks? And that was USC telehealth side contributed our knowledge around training providers to use telehealth. Parents and teachers contributed their training around their proprietary model and curriculum. So now, when we started, we trained everybody for 40 hours in the parents and teachers curriculum and 90 hours in basic telehealth technology and building rapport and screening and evaluation and mandated reporting. We have honed that down quite a bit at this point. And we now have a very solid mechanism for training people. And if folks are interested in pursuing that in their communities, they should contact me or they can contact the Parents and Teachers National Center to be able to discuss what those options would be.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. And we'll share that contact information or links to that in the follow-up email that will go out after today's webinar for those who are interested. We've had a number of folks asking for a little bit more information about the families themselves. Like, what is the socioeconomic target for the families that you're working with? What is the average income of the participants that you have made connections with and are serving so far?
So we have a pretty wide range around socioeconomic status, and it depends heavily on how they were recruited. So our families that were recruited through our LA Best Babies network and through hospitals tend to be on lower socioeconomic status than strata, than our families that were recruited through our social media campaign. And that it really just hinges on how we've recruited them. I think the take-home message is that we are able to serve a wide spectrum of individuals across the socioeconomic spectrum, though.
Thank you. So a couple of questions about kind of the visits themselves. Explain again why the visits need to be more frequent with this virtual approach. And then somebody else is asking what interaction families have with the parent educators in between those visits, if there is any kind of engagement in between visits.
Yeah, I can take this one. So the reason that we offer the visits more frequently is that sometimes families may just forget to turn on their technology. And so we're not physically there to knock on their door like on-ground parent educators are. And the other thing that we found helpful is since we are doing so many assessments, it's really nice to have that frequency of meeting each week so that we can get all of those assessments completed within the National Center's guidelines. And parent educators do have communication with their families between visits. So they are sending families handouts via email in order to prep them for their next visit, or handouts that gave any information from the visit that they just had that they wanted to share with their families. They also email other resources to their families and appointment reminders via email as well. They do call their families, but they block their number when they call their families just because we want to uphold those boundaries. But those would be the only communications in between visits that they would have with families. And sometimes families email them too, just to share. We've had families share like birthday party pictures, or just wanted to share like quick updates that their child walked for the first time.
That's wonderful. That's great. So really showing that connection that's developing between the parent educator and the families. A couple of people have been asking about whether or not the families that are receiving the virtual home visiting services had received in-person home visiting services previously, and if they'd kind of been surveyed about which they prefer, and if there'd been some kind of switching back and forth, moving from virtual to on the ground, or on the ground to virtual home visiting as a part of this program, based upon people's feedback.
So the vast majority of our families had only received virtual home visitation. We have some, and that partially, again, has to do with recruitment. So when we worked with the LA Best Babies Network and our Best Start hospitals in Los Angeles County, the agreement that we made was that we were not going to interfere with their service delivery. So those families that are referred to us from that entity are generally families that didn't qualify for on-ground home visitation offered in LA County. And that could be because of where they live, that could be because they aren't high risk enough, or it could be because they didn't want like in-person home visitation. And then, you know, it's a very different profile for our families that we have recruited virtually.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of the technology, the devices that families are using to engage with you, you've shared a little bit of information about what types of devices that they could use: laptops, tablets, iPhones. You provide folks with tablets or smartphones. You provide them with stands. Somebody has asked about, you know, with all of our devices, they can get broken, they get cracked. Have there been any issues with needing to replace the devices? And if so, how long do they typically last before they need to be replaced?
So the vast majority of families that we serve, we have not provided technology to because they didn't need it. They already had their own laptop, tablet, phone that they would utilize. The families that we did provide technology to, there were some occasional glitches, and we would just issue them a new tablet. I want to highlight the fact that when we loaned families tablets, every single family that borrowed one from us signed an agreement that they would return it to us, that we would provide them with the shipping label. It would be no charge to them, but they would just have to drop it in the mail and return it to us. We have not ever recovered a single tablet that we loaned to a family. You know, I think that technology, to have that device in your hand, is an important lifeline for families that haven't previously had it. I think also when you are a multiply stressed parent, the last thing you're thinking about is going to the mailbox. We, in developing this affiliate, worked very closely with the California Telehealth Network and the Missouri State Telehealth Network, because the Parents and Teachers National Center is in Missouri. Both organizations reported to us that in their work, when looking at loaning technology to consumers, rarely are they recoverable. So I think that's an important thing for any group thinking about doing this to consider, that there is going to be a sunk cost around technology for families if you will provide it.
That's helpful and good to know. That's helpful and good to know that for the majority of families, that was not a cost that you had to provide, that they had their own technology, but good to be aware going in. We've had somebody ask about whether or not you connected with any families prenatally. I know you mentioned making connections in the hospital. Were any of those connections made before delivery or during the pregnancy?
Yeah, so we have served quite a number of families that have been prenatal, and the majority of those came through via social media. We also have some families who maybe they already have a little one in our program, but become pregnant, so our parent educators are serving both children.
Wonderful. That's wonderful. Do you have any visits in Spanish or any other languages than English? And does the technology support that?
Yes, we do have, we've always had a parent educator who has been fluent in Spanish. So what is cool about that as well is our current Spanish parent educator, she has been hosting group connections bilingually. So we've been able to have some group connections where our English speaking families and our Spanish speaking families have come together because she has that skill set.
So getting into the cost savings of this approach, have you done any analysis on the amount of time and money saved from that reduction in the travel time to get to and from a home, from the office to the home and to the next home using this model?
So that is what we're working on right now. So thank you for that question, because that is what we're really focusing on right now, are what are the cost savings to communities. In the general telehealth literature, what we find is that telehealth does not generally reduce costs for providers. And I'm talking about telehealth, the whole spectrum of telehealth, you know, seeing a cardiologist, all of that. It doesn't reduce costs, but it does increase access and engagement. But we are specifically very interested in costs because of the unique costs with home visitation around providers' time, especially around travel. And I know many of you may be in communities where your providers are traveling large distances. We hear stories all the time of in rural territories where home visitors have traveled 2 hours to a person's home only to knock on the door and the family's not home. So please check our website, because the minute we have those results, we will post them there for you.
That's wonderful. Thank you. So we saw that wonderful video of the engagement with the parent educator and the family and the adorable little child, and saw them using those materials like the cotton balls and the bottles and stuff like that. How are materials shared with families for the virtual home visiting? Typically on the ground, the parent educator will bring materials with them to engage the family with. So how are those provided to families? Are they provided in advance? How does that work?
Oh, okay, Amanda, are you chiming in on that one?
Yeah, yep. So I was just going to share that our parents are sent a parent kit through the mail. So that box that you saw in the video where she's pulling materials out, our families receive those in the mail. And then we also share our handouts and also our family journal electronically. So they get a PDF of the family journal that they would receive from their on-ground parent educator in person. They get that same thing virtually. And then if our family is lacking any materials or resources that they might need, our parent educators connect them with a resource where they can find that.
Great, thank you. So what about cancellation rates in terms of families that enroll in the program and then drop out? Wondering if there's any difference between those cancellation rates for families that are using on the ground or receiving on the ground home visiting versus virtual home visiting? And how long do your families typically stay in the program when they're through this virtual program?
Great question. And so there are two factors. There's cancellation for the actual home visit, the session, or the personal visit is what parents and teachers like to call them. And then there are, cancellation of the entire services, or we call that termination in our program, or withdrawal. So our retention rate for the program is 70%, but our no-show rate for individual personal visits is about 50%. So about half of the time a family will come. So that's one of the reasons we schedule people 4 times a month. We expect of those 4 times, we will see them 2 times. That rate is in keeping with the show rate for our telehealth clinic as well. So that's kind of across the board, given this modality, how often people show is about 50%.
So what about, do you track or evaluate the impact that this has once the children go into school? And I know you've only been doing this for 3 years, so maybe none of the families that you've been engaged with are moving into school, but even early learning attendance. Do you see an impact on attendance through this program? And are you reaching out to school districts that will be enrolling these children in a couple of years as a part of this work, or is that something that's planned?
Boy, would we love that opportunity and welcome it. And you're right, part of this is a timeline issue. So for the first 3 years, we've really been focusing on how the curriculum needed to be modified. Spoiler alert, it didn't need to be modified, which was great to find. How we trained people, how we engaged families, things like that. We would love to track children longitudinally and see how they fare once they reach school age. We would love to partner with school districts around that. Many school districts offer home visitation programs themselves. And so, I think that a virtual approach is a natural fit. We've spoken to school districts about those options. So if anybody that's on this webinar is in a region where they would like to explore those options, we are always looking for those kinds of opportunities to expand the reach of this program and to help communities bring it into their own so that they can begin to deliver virtual services.
Thank you. That is a perfect segue for us, a group of questions, a cluster of questions that we've received from folks who are interested in kind of what are the aspirations and or the timeline around scaling this innovative model. And as you grow, do you anticipate the home visitors being affiliated with USC, or would they be local parent educators that are affiliated with their local home visiting programs?
Excellent question, and thank you so much. So we now are, after these 3 years of demonstrating the feasibility of delivering this, are heavily interested in scaling. And that is the next scope for the next 3 to 5 years of thinking about how we can scale this in other communities. And so the approach that we would love to take with communities is to support them. We absolutely do not want all virtual services being delivered by parents and teachers at USC Telehealth because we know that we couldn't possibly meet that scale, but also that communities have their own unique needs and knowledge. And so that needs to be represented in any replication. So we are actively looking for partners that want to bring this to their community. So organizations that would like to be the folks delivering it, that we could partner with you to do training and to talk about how you would recruit and how you would develop a virtual arm of your service delivery. And also funders that are interested in supporting the scaling and expansion of virtual home visitation.
So asked a little bit just previously about school districts and attendance impact of this program. Somebody else has asked about if you're able to tie these home visits back to the Every Student Succeeds Act for early childhood education. Have you looked at the impact or maybe the connections, crosswalking between those two?
We have not. It's a great recommendation, and we have not had that opportunity yet to explore that.
So getting back to kind of the cost and the cost savings, what is the total cost of delivering this program per family served when you combine the cost of the parent educator, the technology, the licenses, et cetera, divided by the number of families served?
So that varies considering the region in the country in which you live and the salaries of your parent educators and things like that. So for any group that's interested in exploring what costs would look like for their specific entity, that is part of what we can work with organizations when we do the readiness checklists with them, is what the cost delivery would look like for you. I will say that Parents and Teachers at USC Telehealth was a unique model in that we frequently were using students who were working on their master's and social work degrees who were completing internships with us as well. So there are mechanisms to flex the cost.
Right, that's a great kind of approach to keeping costs under control. Somebody's interested in understanding, you know, as you're thinking about scaling the program, if there's not a lot of cost savings that comes through it, you know, is that going to limit the potential for scaling this?
So I think it's premature to assume that there's not cost savings. But what I will say also is that we shouldn't be making decisions on service delivery methods based solely on cost. And that in early childhood development is how we've gotten in a lot of trouble. And we have a lot of communities that aren't getting any service because it's just around cost. We also have to think about scalability, how we reach families, and what families are most comfortable with and what they prefer. One of the things we found with this model is that in our community, we have families with very precarious immigration. So to have somebody knock on their front door is exceptionally frightening. And so they weren't interested in having a home visitor come into their home that way, but they would do it using video conferencing. Or if we think about families that have military deployments and they're traveling across the country or internationally, those are families we generally lose in home visitation, but that this model is transferable with that family.
That's a very important point to make, and thank you for underscoring it. So do all of the families stay with the visits or stay enrolled in the program for the duration that is expected for model fidelity? Or are some families receiving short-term assessments and visits and then moving away?
So our families are receiving the exact same thing as they would from an on-ground provider. So they're receiving the same first 8 foundational visits. So parents as teachers, they have the first 8 foundational visits. They receive the same thing as what their on-ground families would, and the same assessments. So affiliates can pick assessments that they want to use, as long as you're picking from the child screenings, the parent screenings, and the family well-being screenings. And so we picked ones in each category, just like an on-ground affiliate would.
So getting back to a recruitment question, how do you determine, or do you determine who gets the virtual home visits versus the in-person home visits or the on-the-ground home visits? Is it voluntary, or is it just who signs up? I know you did the wonderful work around using social media to engage folks that are already using technology to connect with others, but how do those connections, how are those connections made? Can people choose one program versus the other, or one approach?
All of our families were strictly voluntary, so they chose to enroll in our program. So whether it was through, we've had referrals from hospitals or maybe other programs where they didn't have a slot for a family, or families found us through social media or through our website. Or we've had a lot of word of mouth too. So we've had families that have already been in our program, letting their friends know that they should sign up.
That's wonderful. That's a real measure of value when folks are recommending something to their friends and family members. Somebody has asked about issues with screen time with families and whether or not families report that they feel like they've developed a relationship with their virtual home visitor as compared to the relationships that they develop with on the ground home visitors. And it seemed like you were suggesting earlier from responses that there is some deep engagement and relationship building between the two, but could you share a little bit more?
So I'd like to talk about the screen time, and then maybe Amanda can talk about the really beautiful relationships that we've seen emerge. Screen time is something that often comes up, and there's a lot of rhetoric around screen time and what's recommended for a child. I think it's really important to differentiate between the kind of screen time that you saw in that video with Nola and Brandy versus putting a child in front of a YouTube video or even an educational platform. So there's emerging evidence that young children do not learn well from those educational platforms alone. That human relationship and interaction is exceptionally important. But when they're interacting with us, they are still getting that because they are having those same interactions with their parents. What we believe is a really important element of delivering this virtually is that in an on-ground model, sometimes there is a tension for the home visitor around getting the parent to do the activity as opposed to deferring to the home visitor to have the engagement with the child. And in this method, we are really able to double down on coaching that parent so that the parent is doing all of the interaction with their child. And often the kid is not even really paying attention to us on the screen. It's the parent that is aware of us. Amanda, do you want to talk about some of our parent-educator relationships?
Yeah, I would say that as a parent educator, even though I was miles away because I was in Michigan and my families were in other states, I felt very close with my families and the feeling was mutual. I was able to build those relationships and felt like I was actually in the home, especially you know, like doing safety checks. I would have parents put like the iPad down on the ground so that we could be on the child's level and things like that. So you actually are a part of their home in the relationship with the family. And I remember one prenatal client that I had when I had to terminate my relationship because I was done with my field placement. She was about a month away from having her child. And she actually like cried our last visit because I wasn't going to be able to see her new baby over the platform, but I was able to transfer her over to another parent educator and she was able to build a relationship with that individual. And we did that through a warm handoff where I was there and the other parent educator joined the session with us. So I think that even though you are virtual, you're able to build these really personal and meaningful relationships. I know that the work I did with families is going to stick with me for the rest of my life.
That's really touching and sweet. Somebody has asked about whether or not you ever record the virtual home visits. We saw the recording where you were kind of demonstrating this program with that mother and child. Are there times when you record the home visits as a part of the program, or that special time when you got permission ahead of time to demonstrate with them?
Yes, it's an exception, not the rule. I will say that because we would never want our families to think that we are recording all of their interactions and studying them and being invasive. But there are times where we will additionally ask families and have them consent to being recorded. We did that when we were doing some work around screening and developing best practices for screening. And we also do that as a part of our training to be able to coach our parent educators. We will record small snippets and then be able to see what's happening. That's another wonderful feature of doing this virtually, is that we can actually have supervisors drop into the personal visits and observe, but not turn on their cameras. So they're not invasive in the process, but they're able to observe what's going on. Families know it's happening, but it's not as if there's another person sitting in their home disturbing the dynamic.
Thank you. That's an important point. Somebody has asked about families that may benefit from mental health services and whether or not they are referred to USC's mental health telehealth program through their home visiting interaction.
Yeah, so they are referred to USC's telehealth program, which actually is very nice because that's another free virtual service that they're able to have. And we have a good, relationship with the mental health clinic that we're able to make sure that they are seen. And because say, for example, that would only be for our families who are in California. So if a family, did screen positively for depression and they were in another state, we would still find them a mental health resource.
I think we're finally starting to get through all of the amazing questions that people were sharing. One person asked about the number of providers that were engaged as a part of the virtual home visiting prototype and pilot over the past 3 years. How many virtual home visitors were trained in delivering the services during that time?
So we have 20 individuals to be virtual home visitors at this point. And I want to draw your attention, if you go to our website under our research findings, we have a recent article that we published that describes some of that as well. So some of these questions that have emerged around attendance, retention, number trained, that's all covered in that research manuscript that we've recently published.
Thank you for sharing that, Dorian. And that's a great opportunity to remind everybody that all of the resources that are referenced, so the website, this new report, the video that was shared, we'll be sending links to those in a follow-up email that will be coming out in about a week and a half, 2 weeks from now. So there have been so many resources shared, and I know people have been asking questions about various slides, so they're very interested in all of these resources. So all of that material will be shared with you so that you can have it to inform your work moving forward. I believe that is all of the questions that we had from today. Thank you so much, Dorian and Amanda, for being so responsive and jumping in and answering all of these questions. I think that's the most that we've had in our GLR Learning Tuesdays webinars so far to date. So really appreciate your time and thoughtfulness in those. Just wanted to see if you have any kind of follow-up comments that you'd like to share with our the participants today. Maybe some additional opportunities for connecting and learning with this work moving forward.
Let me unmute myself there. So we, as I said previously, are heavily interested in expanding and working in other regions. We have had talks with other states and other communities to replicate this where they live. And so we would welcome any groups that are interested in reaching out to us to, by all means, contact us, and also attend the webinar next week to think about additional solutions for your community that can be delivered virtually. And then, approach us and let us know how we can support you.
Dorian, Amanda, is there anything you would like to share?
Oh, thank you for having me and for all of your questions, and feel free to email me anytime.
Great. I apologize. I've got some background noise and I was trying to keep myself muted. But I would just like to say thank you both to Dorian and to Amanda and to Carly, who had to step away and run to a meeting during the webinar. Thank you so much for taking the time to prepare this presentation and for sharing all of the great work that you're doing to really scale up and learn from the promise that's offered by today's technology in terms of reaching more families in a more efficient and timely manner through virtual home visiting. And then I would just like to remind everybody again, this is our regular weekly series, so we hope that you will continue to join in. We will be continuing this very conversation about virtual home visiting in next Tuesday's webinar, as we'll have a team from the Parents as Teachers National Center talking about the work and the potential of virtual home visiting, continuing to scale up and think about expanding this approach. And then we've got other conversations scheduled for later on this month, and hope that you will continue to join in. Just a reminder that we will be sending a link or sending an email with links to the recording and to the slide deck and to all of the resources that have been shared. I see that Suzanne has just posted the slides right here so that you can have an access to them immediately, but I just want to thank you all for joining in and asking such great questions about this really innovative approach for reaching and supporting families with young children. So thank you again, Dorian and Amanda, and thank you everybody for joining in for today's conversation.